Hi everyone, this is Alan Shimel, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, and welcome to another DevOps.com webinar. Today's webinar is SecDevOps, the marriage of SecOps and DevOps. It's a topic that's near and dear to me, and we're actually joined by a group of friends of mine, and I think it makes an amazing all-star panel. Let me introduce you. First of all, we have Gene Kim, renowned author of the Phoenix Project and the upcoming DevOps Handbook, as well as co-founder of Tripwire, so with a long history of both security and DevOps. Joining Gene and myself today, we also have Shannon Lietz. Shannon is a DevSecOps leader at Intuit and one of the founders and driving forces behind the DevSecOps movement. And then certainly last but certainly not least is another friend, Evident.io CEO Tim Prendergast, who has a long history in DevOps and SecOps as well. So welcome to all three of our panel members. And I just also want to mention that today's webinar is sponsored by Evident.io. So thank you for that. Without further ado, let me turn things over first to Gene Kim, who will handle the next part of our webinar.
Thank you so much, Alan. And I'm excited to be presenting with Shannon, who I've known for, I guess, over a decade now. We were running in the SOC auditor circles in the early 2000s. And Tim, it's a pleasure to be presenting with you as well. Jules, on the next slide, DevOps has been an area of passion for me for the last 7 years, and that's been because studying high-performing technology organizations has been my primary area of study since 1999. What we noticed in 2004, I think that made me so receptive to the DevOps message, especially as it pertains to information security, is that DevOps is what allows us to escape the downward spiral. What we started noticing was that every organization, independent of technology, independent of company size, independent of industry vertical that we were operating in, left unchecked without something like DevOps would lead to horrendous outcomes, not just for dev, test, and operations, but especially information security and ultimately the organizations that we served. And I think the best verbalization of why the downward spiral occurs was best framed by Ward Cunningham when he said it's due to technical debt. Technical debt is that which we feel the next time that we want to make a change. So that's bad for development, that slows us down, but ultimately increases the surface area of risk that information security must then clean up. And I think, Jules, on the next slide, the reason why so many of us are so passionate about DevOps is that because we know there's a better way. In 2009, in the seminal presentation that was given at the Velocity Conference, John Allspaw and Paul Hammond described how they're doing tens of deploys per day. And we now know that these unicorn organizations like Google, Amazon, Netflix, Spotify, Etsy, Twitter, Facebook, they are all doing tens, hundreds, or even thousands of deployments per day while preserving world-class reliability, stability, and security. That's something that we didn't think possible 10 years ago. And on the next slide, Jules, we know now that it's not just the unicorns, but it's ultimately the horses as well, large, complex organizations that have been around for decades or maybe even over a century that are getting the same amazing outcomes that the unicorns have. So it's large retailers, it's telecommunications, it's people who operate ground control stations for satellites, it's government agencies. And this is creating competitive advantage for them, and they're often highly regulated, operating under decades of a tradition of command and control. It's my genuine belief that DevOps is historically significant, that 10 years from now, historians will look back and say DevOps was when how we work with technology transformed. And when they ask where did DevOps come from, I think they will all point with unanimity to this next slide, this presentation given by John Allspaw and Paul Hammond. And this presentation was when Allspaw, the head of operations at Flickr, and Paul Hammond, the director of engineering at Yahoo, they gave this astonishing presentation saying that they're doing 10 deploys a day, every day, as a part of their daily work. And by all first-hand accounts, people who were there knew that they were in the presence of something historically significant. I can say with some embarrassment that that was not my reaction. My reaction was more like what's represented in the following slide, Jules. It was more of disbelief. Right, 10 deploys a day is impossible, and even if it were possible, it sounds reckless, ill-advised, it sounds, quite frankly, immoral, because why would a decent person do 10 deploys a day to someone else when they didn't need to? It just, one, it doesn't seem very nice, but two, it sounds horrendous. And I now genuinely believe, whether we're in dev, test, or operations, if we can't create around us a system of work that can allow us to do deployments on demand, in other words, when organizations need it most, then we risk irrelevance, not just in our functional silo of dev, test, operations, or even information security, but ultimately we jeopardize the organizations that we serve. In the information security community, on the next slide, Jules, our equivalent of the 10 deploys a day at Flickr presentation is probably this presentation. I remember seeing Neil Matatall, Justin Collins, and Alex Smolen present at the AppSec USA conference in 2012 about the journey that they helped lead, where they were trying to help Twitter recover from the 2009 hack, where essentially the Barack Obama account was hacked, and they got slapped with an FTC trade injunction that said they must prove that there's a cure for the next 20 years. And so they led the cleaning up of the information security debt in dev and operations, fully integrating security into the daily work of dev and ops in an amazing 3-year journey that spanned from 2009 to 2012. And I think this just shows that DevOps security is absolutely integral to the DevOps journey. In fact, in the next slide, we see this slide that was presented at the DevOps Enterprise Conference, which I've hosted now for 2 years, where Topobrata Pal at Capital One, he described the DevOps capabilities at Capital One, but they don't call it DevOps there, they call it DevOps Sec. And I love this slide because I think it fully and brilliantly articulates how we fully integrate the work of security into the daily work of dev, test, and operations. So ideally, we have our preventive controls like two-factor authentication or how we configure OpenSSL. All of those are stored in shared source code repositories that can be accessed across the organization. And if we use those libraries, we are already pre-blessed by security. Alongside our automated testing, we are running static code analysis tools so we can find vulnerabilities long before it gets into production. And alongside our production telemetry and monitoring, we're running dynamic security testing so we can find vulnerabilities before attackers do. And I love this because it shows us how security isn't something we do at the end, but it's something that we do at every stage of a software endeavor. On the next slide, Jules, this is so consistent with what has been in the DevOps community from the very beginning. Theo Schlossnagel said at the Velocity conference in 2011, he said, DevOps is a terrible term, it's prone to misinterpretation, it's incomplete. What would he call it? Jules, on the next slide, he would call it star ops, or maybe even more pedantically, .star ops, or even more pedantically on the next slide, is really every department ops. It's he asked, where is information security, where is test, where is network engineering, where are the DBAs, where are the product owners? Because that is the village we need to mobilize in order to get these amazing outcomes of fast flow from dev to ops while preserving world-class reliability, security, and stability. The last thing I want to share with you is on the next slide. I worked with Jez Humble. He was a co-author, or is the co-author, of the Continuous Delivery book. And we worked with Puppet Labs for 3 years, where we benchmarked over 20,000 organizations, really to understand what does high performance look like. And what we found was that high performers are massively outperforming their non-high performing peers. We know that high performers are doing 30 times more frequent deployments. And more importantly, they can finish those deployments 200 times faster than their peers. In other words, how quickly can we go from code committed by dev, test, or operations, or InfoSec, through the test cycle, through the deployment cycle to successfully running in production? High performers can do it in minutes or hours, whereas lower performers might take weeks, months, or quarters. On the next slide, we learned that high performers are also getting far better outcomes. When they do a deployment, they're 60 times more likely to succeed without causing a Sev1 outage, a service impairment, a security breach, or a compliance failure. And when something does go wrong, they can fix it 168 times faster. In other words, when something goes wrong, whether it's operational or security related, the mean time to restore service is 168 times faster. The last slide on the benchmarking is we now know that these high performers have not only better IT performance, but they also have better organizational performance. They're twice as likely to exceed profitability, market share, and productivity goals. And they have 50% higher market cap growth over 3 years. That's for the nearly 1,000 organizations that gave us a stock ticker symbol. So that's exciting just for so many reasons to show that there is a business value of adopting DevOps principles and patterns. The last prepared slide I have for you, Alan, is the next one, which just says it is the 3 ways. So in the Phoenix project, our goal, and in the upcoming DevOps handbook, we frame everything in the 3 ways. So the 3 ways are a set of principles from which you can derive all of the DevOps patterns from. And so the first way is all about flow as we go from left to right in the value stream. So this is where the continuous delivery pipeline exists. This is where everything's into version control. This is about automated testing. This is about having information security fully embedded in that process. The second way is all about the quick flow of feedback from right to left. So whenever something goes wrong, we can ideally detect the problem quickly and prevent it from going into production. And if we can't prevent it from going to production, we can at least enable quicker detection and recovery. And so that's everything about, again, automated testing. It's about production telemetry. And again, information security is an absolute part of that. And the third way is all about fostering a culture of high trust, experimentation, and learning. And so that means doing things like fearlessly injecting faults into the production environment, things like Chaos Monkey and Security Monkey, where we are purposefully injecting problems into production so that we can get ever better at recovering from them, making us more resilient. If this is of any interest to you, on the next slide, here is how you can learn more. You can get a full 1-hour presentation of the slide deck for that presentation. We have slides from all of DevOps Enterprise 2014 and 2015. There's a link to a piece of guidance that we wrote called the DevOps Audit Defense Toolkit, and anyone who wants drafts of the upcoming DevOps handbook, all you have to do is send an email to realgenekim@sendyourslides.com with subject line DevOps. So if you just send an email, realgenekim@sendyourslides.com, subject line DevOps, you will get an automated response within a minute or two with all of these resources. With that, Alan, thank you so much, and I'd love to turn it over to Shannon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gene. That was a great set of slides and presentation there, very informative. And now let's turn things over to Shannon, who is going to kind of carry the load here in delivering the DevSecOps message. Shannon Lietz.
Thanks, Alan, for introducing me. And wow, that was an incredible introduction to DevOps by Gene. I've been working on DevSecOps now for quite a while and was inspired initially by the rugged movement. One of the things that came out of the rugged movement was an incredible manifesto that was a truly inspiring story for me. And one of the things that I really was interested in from understanding the rugged manifesto was this notion of resilient and secure software and a different way of approaching potentially the problem of trying to get security into the continuous delivery pipeline. Obviously, that meant that rugged was such an important part of my practice, and I had been doing something equivalent to that for years. Got introduced to utility computing and cloud computing early on, and what I noticed by the introduction to rugged was it was absolutely an inspirational message, but when I looked around in the industry, there was truly no one really doing rugged, and there were very few practitioners that were actually implementing some of the practices and experimenting with how things could come together in a rugged way for security. And so DevSecOps was a method of branding how we were experimenting to get rugged, and it's really an evolving story. Next slide, please. So building on to that, one of the things that came up for us on the journey to get to DevSecOps was we really needed to work in a cloud security environment, and as a company we chose to work on trying to move our monolithic applications to the cloud because we realized that we wanted to publish very quickly and get our software out to our customers in a meaningful way. We really focus on innovation and trying to accelerate our feedback loop between our customers and the products that we provide. And in doing so, there was this notion of traditional security, and we had experimented with trying to apply embedded problems to, or being able to embed people into the software pipeline and trying to embed our security into the software pipeline. And what we found out is that we were gating the software pipeline, that some of the software was being published 2 and 3 times a day, and we really couldn't scale our efforts as security practitioners. We had embedded folks into DevOps teams from a security practice, and basically we had folks that had different security capabilities across the board being asked to move into the DevOps teams. And what that really looked like was a security person for every DevOps team trying to help them to move their software into a secure state. Unfortunately, security is really a broad and complex environment for most companies. It means that you have infrastructure security and access security and different types of security, really, application security. And because of that, the notion of doing cloud security was really interesting to us because it meant that we had to fold all of that really together to try and have it become security as code. And so the from here is really, we were working in a very serial way to try and get security into the continuous pipeline. And it's really become more of an application and a way of doing things from the standpoint of code itself. So it's transformed into security as code. Next slide, please. So what's DevSecOps really? One of the things we've been working on is really to try and define what it is, to understand how to innovate, really practice what we preach, try to move closer to our customers, and those being really DevOps teams. Accelerating fast decision making, and to what Jean said earlier, try to create a high trust environment for our practitioners that are trying to bring their security thought process and information to DevOps teams so they can make decisions, and so that there's really a partnership between the teams. Security is not necessarily something that's out on its own, but there are a lot of different things that come up during the continuous delivery pipeline and delivery of software to the environment. In doing so, you have things like security automation, security at scale, and really trying to figure out how to get out of the way, create a frictionless environment so that software can be delivered and secured at the same time. And that really means that you have to focus on creating transparency in the environment so that there is a way forward that doesn't require lots of gates and different manual checks. This means that you're practicing security in a different way and really trying to figure out how to create a set of systematic checks in the background that feed back into the developers as they're moving their software out to production. And this simply means that automation is truly the key to this. Next slide, please. The DevSecOps manifesto is something that came up a few years ago, and one of the reasons why it became sort of our guiding light, if you will, is that we wanted to change truly how we were doing security, and we wanted to figure out how to make it so that it could be embraced and value could be created in a different way. So we started to ask ourselves, what is it that we're trying to provide back to the company? What's getting in the way of continuous delivery? Why are we getting more defects without remediation? And how can we change how that happens? So we started to ask ourselves, as security professionals, how do we want to provide value to DevOps teams? What can we do to speed up decisions? How can we be better partners? And our answer was to start to test and sort of act like internal attackers so that we were attacking software and trying to make it more rugged over time. And by doing so, that meant that we had to immediately transform how we were practicing, bringing out tools that didn't really exist, adding into our tool chain, making it so that when we did security research that we were taking that information and transforming into security as code either through tests and automation or by making it so that we had secure components that DevOps teams could immediately embrace. Next slide, please. So security as code is an interesting concept. Really, it's really important to understand why documents don't make sense for DevOps teams. Huge, long, hundreds of page documents don't allow a DevOps team to move fast. It does it does provide the requirements that are necessary for a DevOps team, but it doesn't necessarily make it fast and actionable. And so taking a document all the way through to security as code and transforming it means that as security professionals, we're reducing the amount of overload for a DevOps team member, and we're making it so that it's digestible chunks by transforming it into code snippets that they can use in their workloads. And so as you're transforming from a traditional capability in a data center where you might be writing firewall rules and you might be transforming your compliance into checks that are going into systems like scanners, this is more akin to making it so that security moves closer and closer to the source code and the applications being delivered, and also from the standpoint of service orientation. Next slide, please. So security via APIs is really a big practice these days in the hunt for being rugged and for the hunt towards making it so that we can operate as security professionals and provide our wares, if you will, back to the DevOps teams. One of the interesting things that we discovered very early on was that when we started to talk to vendors, we had to have an API to be able to pull our automation together and make it so that it could be utilized within the continuous delivery pipeline for DevOps teams to be able to publish. As we started to check through most security software, we found that very few vendors actually provided an API. And so it's a critical component to one of the things that we ask for these days. And then the other thing that we discovered is that while everything needs to be delivered as an API for security, that we also needed to ourselves pull together that information and make it so that it transformed to be more custom for our workloads, which was an interesting endeavor to try and customize already existing commercial and open source applications. Easier automation is really a key component to this, making it repeatable so that development teams really don't have to struggle through adding security to their workloads. Next slide, please. So, we delivered this discussion for DevSecOps in more detail at the reInvent show this year. And one of the interesting thought processes we had was, what does it really take to be a DevSecOps capability? And we know that it's a serious team sport. It requires operations, developers, blue teaming, red teaming, security to all come together. And uniquely, this means that every individual who's really going to participate becomes part of a team. They may or may not have all of these capabilities, but as a person joins a team that's doing DevSecOps, it's really about embracing what their major contribution is. They may be a developer with a minor in security, and transforming it through red and blue team. Next slide, please. And so you can see what happens is really you're adding towards the skill set of a member of DevSecOps. And what we consider this is really a purple squirrel, if you will, somebody who's really bringing in all of the knowledge of what it takes to be a developer, an operations person, a security professional, and pulling together all of that in one person is really interesting and provides a really unique perspective. You get the empathy of understanding what it takes to deliver on time and provide customer value, how to keep software up and make it resilient, and then really how to thwart attackers before software is actually weakened and overtaken through a compromise. Next slide, please. We've also discovered that one of our major contributions to the community of DevOps teams is that we need to digest security decisions and make them easier and more actionable. And so we spend a lot of our time working through the examples and use cases within our organization and then providing things like this matrix, which makes it so that security decisions are a little bit easier to understand. And then when a developer utilizes this type of tool, they can easily come back, do a pull request, make a modification to it when they find something that doesn't make sense, or they have a question, or something that they learn can be contributed back. Next slide, please. So what's really the heart of DevSecOps success? Being rugged is really a difficult journey for most. I would say that detecting and resolving security issues quickly is really the heart of how to understand the right mindset for DevSecOps. And that means that understanding how to bring your security value back to the DevOps teams as quickly as possible is really about the feedback loop that most teams need to supply to DevOps for them to be able to include it in the customer value chain. Additionally, really trying to hone in on native security capabilities, avoiding creating additional overhead through security mechanisms that may or may not work, and oftentimes might provide overkill for something that's a little bit of an easy security problem. We also believe that there's sort of a crawl, walk, run, and trying to create bite-sized chunks for DevOps teams to follow along so that there is no one left behind is a critical element, which is why we've combined red teaming and training into the same scenario every week. We have Red Team Mondays where we utilize bite-sized chunks by testing and attacking the software that's in our environment and returning back through remediation tickets information to help the developer not only remediate the issue but also understand why it happened in the first place. Next slide, please. So what are some of the critical principles that you need to understand to be able to move forward with DevSecOps and to get more rugged? Really, one of the most critical is to understand that this really isn't a destination, that we're constantly experimenting as a DevSecOps community. And that means that really providing experiments, understanding decisions, identifying problems and solutions, testing and learning and failing fast is part of that journey. Small security teams can absolutely have a profound impact, and that means that a small security team can pull together a massive amount of information by simply looking out into the community and looking for tools that already exist. Some folks are already providing things like there's a tool called Gauntlet. We leverage, it has Gherkin for writing security tests, and we're working within the community ourselves. Security practitioners are hard to find, and as professionals they have a lot of options, and so building up the right amount of security expertise is an ongoing struggle for many organizations, which also means that we want to preserve the amount of time that a security professional is working on different kinds of problems, and providing self-service and enablement for DevOps teams to easily pull in the information they need, say at 2 a.m. instead of having to wait for the next day, is another element that's required for DevSecOps to be part of the environment you're working in. Translating security for the layperson, absolutely a must to communicate better as security practitioners and professionals. Trying to figure out how to translate that security into something that is actionable instead of referencing a CVE score or looking at a CVSS score, trying to take that information and turn it into something that the DevOps teams can easily digest. We've done so through grading and GPAs, taking our tests and transforming them into an A through an F grading scale, and then rolling it up through GPAs to make it so that DevOps teams can utilize something they already know to make quick and actionable decisions. And then finally, perfection is the enemy. One of the things that we really have embraced truly is this notion of failing fast, getting information back as quickly as possible, and realizing that it's really a crawl, walk, run journey for us, and that we're probably never going to be done, but we'll always be maturing as we learn and we bring more information back to ourselves as a community. Next slide, please. So that leaves me off to Q&A, and Alan, back to you.
What are your thoughts on pushback for allowing developers direct access to production or not as a security rule? Shannon, you want to take first shot, or Tim, either one?
I want to jump on that one as well. So,
okay.
You know, it's interesting to hear that there's pushback, because we've gotten to the point where we don't push back on things like that. We've come up with ways to create a trustable environment. And I think this goes back to what I said earlier about testing and instrumentation. It's really about, like what Jean said earlier, if you have an environment where you're creating a feedback loop and you're providing that information back, you can sample, you can audit, you can do those things as part of your automation to really make checkpoints more transparently. And I think that that means that you need to be able to give the DevOps teams the ability to create their innovative product, be able to manage and maintain it, because they are the ones that know how to do those things effectively. So from my perspective as a security practitioner, we've really leveraged automation to make it so that there isn't a need to push back. If you do get that pushback, I think it's about working with that security practitioner to find ways to get them to get the information that they need so that they get more comfortable with the environment being successful in a high trust way.
Tim, thoughts?
You know, I think we've really changed gears as security professionals and you know, technology companies to where when we got things like the cloud or programmatic infrastructure, that is tailor-made for developers to be able to just go hog wild and really do some amazing things. And by telling them, no, you can't play in there, no, you can't get data from there, no, you can't log in and evaluate things, you're really hamstringing their ability to effectively improve the quality of your business and your user experience. And so if you look at it in an alternative way, you should assume that your developers are allowed access to production environments and can get in there and can actually be involved in the productionization of your technology. But what you need to have is compensating controls and mechanisms in place that let them do so without potentially getting themselves in trouble. So, you know, granular rights control, full auditing and logging, these things that are meant to make sure that they're doing, you know, what they're supposed to be doing, and in the event that someone's not, I mean, no control on the planet's going to stop a malicious insider from going and stealing credentials and getting in production. But you sure as hell can have a whole bunch of developers who are keeping a close eye on the way that your users are using the product, the way other people are using the infrastructure, and detect things like that happen, as well as find performance, scalability, quality issues. I don't see a huge value other than to satisfy some legacy controls, and even PCI 642 we just talked about, this. Keeping the developers out is not a fundamentally business-friendly tactic, and it's one of those things that puts security and engineering, you know, butting heads for what is really not a very good reason. There's a way for you to actually have them be highly productive and successful, let them have the access they need, but still maintain the level of control and risk aversion you need to have as a business, so everybody wins. And that's really what people should be looking at. It shouldn't be I say no because I say no, and that's the end of the discussion. That's how you talk to toddlers, not how you talk to professional engineers that are, you know, helping pay your salary and theirs and making users happy.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the stories that a friend told me, she runs the DevOps practice at one of the largest banks, and she said, you know, we have a bunch of, we had a developer plant a backdoor in our ATM code, and basically they were able to go to any ATM, put in a code, right, and put it into maintenance mode and take all the money out. And, you know, she said, you know, how did we find that backdoor? It wasn't through a code review. It wasn't through the 40, you know, word change request form. You know, we found it through proactive monitoring. You know, it was actually found in operations review, and they were asking the question, wait a minute, why are 5% of the ATMs in a certain market going to maintenance mode? And so they were, you know, they detected it so quickly. You know, I think it was actually faster than even the cash audit process. So I think in my mind, it was such a powerful, you know, epiphany for me that says, you know, any reliance that we have on the code review process, you know, for a motivated attacker who has a means, motive, opportunity, and time, right? I think is an illusion, right? And forget about separation of duty, or forget about the change approval process, right? Those would not have caught that error. So it's, you know, I think this really elevates this, I think, known reality that, you know, we have to have production telemetry, you know, so that we can find these errors. It's not about prevention; it's also about, you know, effective detection and recovery.
Yeah, you know, I want to build on that a little bit, and I think you kind of sparked my insights too. You know, from a DevOps perspective, one of the things that you take away from being a powerful organization is that when folks that build something who know it best are taken away from that environment, you actually give your attacker a bit of an adversarial advantage, because the person who knows it best isn't able to understand if something's going wrong within that environment. And so I think it's kind of a mix of trusting the people who develop something that they want their, in a way, baby to live, and they also will provide the instrumentation, automation, and effectiveness of being, basically part of the same organization in line with the goals of the organization. So from my perspective, taking that decision maker out of the loop is really less effective from a security perspective.
One of the people who's influenced my thinking, for over a decade, her name is Elizabeth Hendrickson. She's helped pioneer some of the quality engineering principles going back over a decade. And she was describing this one exercise that they did at the, they called it it was the Los Altos workshop for software testing. It was the best testers in the game, and it was over the course of 5 years. They ran these workshops, about 60 of them. And in one workshop, they basically did this kind of exercise. They said, for the best testers in the game, everyone write down what was a dev test ratio for your worst project, as well as what was the dev test ratio for your best project. And she relayed this, the numbers for the worst project was all across the board. No conclusions could be drawn. But there was a surprising amount of unanimity that for people's best projects, the dev test ratio was no testers, right? And so this is so prone to misinterpretation, right? These are professional testers, right? And yet, what the insight was that when quality is no one else's. When there is no one else, no safety net to catch a quality error, it is fully owned by the development teams, and it's fully integrated into the function. I think this has an equal ramification to security as well. Is that when security is perceived as a job of an external department, then all the outcomes get worse. Just as if we have a test department where developers view the test department will catch my errors for me, and so by fully putting those responsibilities onto the shoulders of the developers, we actually get all the outcomes that we wanted for. So it's one of these sort of, in my mind, just incredibly counterintuitive and provocative and almost outrageous notions, and yet it resonates with me in terms of my own experiences.
Yep. Okay. Next question. I'm sorry, guys, but we have a lot of questions, and I thought we had so much time for questions, and it goes quick. This is one I think, Gene, I'm going to throw it at you real quick because it's one I know dealt with before. What is it about SecDevOps that makes it different or distinguishes it from quote unquote non-Sec DevOps? After all, there is only one DevOps, right?
DevOps Sec, rugged DevOps.
Yep.
In my mind, it really is the same, right? I mean, I think the Theo Schlossnagle slide about star ops, I mean, that essentially is everything. If you want to get really pedantic, right, we're talking about the whole value streams. That's the business owners, that's the organization that we serve, everything that goes from, idea to actually running in production, so it's actually creating value for the customer, right? But that's a little bit unwieldy to say. DevOps is just a wonderful way of capturing that zeitgeist, and let's just say that security belongs in DevOps, not just now and all the way back in time.
Yep. I would just quickly add that there is only one DevOps, and there is this idea of DevOps, and security is inherently part of it. And do we put the Sec in to make the security people feel more involved or not? Don't get hung up on labels. Hang your hat on what's being done. Shannon?
I totally agree with that. One of the things that I would tell you is things get branded to make it so that there's change and there's active change transformation. DevSecOps as a label was to help us to understand how to turn security into code, was to really embrace the notions of being rugged, practicing DevOps. And so as a security transformation and movement, the way that we look at what we're doing is to bring experimentation to the forefront for security to make that transformation so that it's easier to understand how to fit it into DevOps practices, how to make it so that the feedback loop is really part of creation and making it so that customers can get what they need out of companies.
Great. Next question, because again we're running late. Are there any white papers, etc., from the Capital One experience that you can share? Interested to see how this was done in the financial services world. So before Gene jumps all over this one, you can go to the YouTube channel for the DevOps Enterprise Summit, and I think you will see, it's Topol, right? Or Gene is the gentleman's name from Cap One?
Correct.
Gene?
Yes, Matatall, and I'm looking to see if we got.
It's definitely, I believe it's up on the DevOps Enterprise Summit. I know my interview with him. Or maybe
I think we're still working on getting approvals.
The approvals. And guys, that obviously is always an issue around financial institutions giving out interviews, white papers, etc. And I know, Tim, you guys work with Cap One. There are other financial institutions, though, that have published some white papers around DevOps, I know, and security and DevOps. Nationwide comes to mind with Carmen Diardo. Gene, you know any others?
Yeah, Bank of America spoke this year, and
isn't there a European bank? Not TAF.
ING. ING had 2 presentations this year.
Yes, ING, correct. I interviewed, and again, YouTube, the DevOps Enterprise channel on YouTube is a great resource if you want to see the actual sessions that these folks gave there, as well as the interviews I did with them later, but it's just a shameless plug. And if we can get some more, we'll put them up along with the other links Gene has been kind enough to forward to us when we post the recording of this. Last question of the day, guys, and guys, the rest of the questions that are here that are in writing, we will submit to Shannon and Gene and Tim, and if we can get written answers, we'll post those as follow-up as well. Can you explain how containerization technologies, Docker, CoreOS, etc., affects the roles of the blue team, especially for incident response? How should our processes and methodology change to better match containerized infrastructure? Tim, Shannon, either one of you want to take that one?
That's likely a long answer. So let me just try and take it for a moment. When you start to look at containerization, it's really about making sure that you have appropriate instrumentation to identify the container to be able to pull it in from the standpoint of what manifest got built to be able to deploy it. And so for incident response specifically, the way that we do it is we actually snapshot the entire system still, but then focus our efforts on understanding how that container was exposed. I think that containerization is pretty early on when it comes to really being able to understand the incident response impacts and experiments that still have to be run. So I think that this is an early part of the journey when it comes to doing more DevOps and security integration.
Tim?
Yeah, I'll make it short. I think for something that came kind of from LXC and from BSD jails and that security legacy, containers left a lot behind and went to the application portability side of the house and focused their efforts there as far as telemetry data, instrumentation. What Shannon said is right. We're really early in that game. What we'll see is containers being able to convey a lot more about their composition programmatically over time and make it so we don't have to backtrack and to build manifests and deployment audit trails and things to really understand what's going on with them as much. Today, they present a little bit of a challenge just because their whole purpose is abstraction, and that makes a lot of security technologies lose visibility or lose efficacy, in containerized environments. So, we've written a couple articles on the effect of this, and there's a lot of stuff kind of murmuring happening in the publications around containers and security. And I would expect that, one of the things you'll see in 2016 is a lot more focus from Docker and other containerization technologies on pushing more security intelligence outwards about the container so that organizations that are leveraging them can get, much more responsive and can detect when, things kind of go south inside a container.
I think we're already seeing it. I think in the last 3-4 weeks, I know on DevOps.com and Container Journal we've covered a bunch of announcements around container security. But that being said, guys, we're way over the top of the hour, and I do appreciate everyone staying on because there was some great questions, but we're going to have to call it a day. As I said, we will submit the written remaining questions to our panels for answers. You'll see them up on DevOps.com in 24 to 48 hours. But for now, Gene Kim, Shannon Lietz, Tim Prendergast, thank you so much for an amazing, amazing webinar today on DevSecOps or SecDevOps. Thank you, and thank you all of our attendees. Yes, thank you everyone for coming. Bye-bye, and also, hey, thank Evident.io for sponsoring this and actually a series of webinars we've been doing on DevOps and security. So, Tim, many thanks to the
Anytime we love this topic. Yep, happy to do it.
All righty. All right, everyone, have a great day, and until next time, this is Alan Shimel for DevOps.com.